Today, one of our guest speakers is Allison Carpenter. If you know her, of course, she's amazing. We all know this. But she is a Harry S. Truman Scholar and graduate of Harvard University. Howard, I'm so sorry. Howard University. She has degrees in political science and community development. At age 18, she was elected and served as an advisory neighborhood commissioner in the District of Columbia. Oh my goodness. Oh. It makes her the youngest elected official in history of the capital nation. Wow, okay. Carpenter has proudly served on the National Organization Committee of Women's March in Washington, which is a very big deal. As a black woman myself, I'm so sorry. Had to point that out. But upon her return to Howard, she was elected as the Student Government Associate President. So let's give her a round of applause and welcome her to the podium.
Good afternoon. It is such an honor to be with you guys on today to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the Glenville uprising. I am so grateful to Case Western Reserve for having me. Just a few months ago, I was able to speak at the Race, Food, and Justice Conference with the EHW and Kim Foreman back there. I see you. And so it's so great to be back to talk about my journey as a community activist, an organizer, and elected official, and to just share my thoughts as a millennial, which I will just spoil it for you. I'm incredibly idealistic, bear with me today. But I'm incredibly excited to talk to you all about the way I think, we can engage different generations to move our communities forward and tackle the problems facing our communities. But I also hate giving speeches like this. I like to have conversations. And so I've asked for permission to be able to engage with the audience. And so I don't want you guys to feel any pressure to wait till the end of my remarks to ask questions. I'd like this to be a dialogue because I have as much to learn from you as hopefully you'll learn from me today. So is that okay? If you have a question, feel free to interrupt, challenge me. I'm looking forward to this whole thing. So let's get to it. My name's Allison Carpenter. I am a recent graduate of Howard University, but I was born right here in Cleveland, Ohio. As a young person in Cleveland, Northeast Ohio, I did struggle with chronic housing insecurity and the pains that come along with poverty. My single mom, who's here, Elena Carpenter in the back, did everything she could. Yeah, give my mom a hand, right? Right. But yeah, so we dealt with chronic housing insecurity before I ever even understood what that term meant. It just seemed like, we were struggling, but my mom was doing everything she could to, keep a house over our head, food on the table. And in many ways, until I got to college, that seemed normal, right? Black people this must be a collective struggle. We struggle in order to get anything. But when I got into college and studied community development, I learned that what I experienced in Northeast Ohio was true of black communities across the country and was a result of systematic injustice. And that has informed a lot of the work that I've done today, realizing that it's not normal that my school in this neighborhood doesn't have the resources that the school across town has. It's not normal, it's not okay that my life expectancy will be shorter than someone who is white and of a different economic status. I realized that those things weren't normal, and so I wanted to do something about it. Unfortunately, I moved to a city where chronic homelessness and chronic housing insecurity makes Cleveland's look, almost like a goal. Washington, D.C. has one of the most embarrassing housing markets in the country, but someone else standing in front of you might say the complete opposite, right? I am currently, full disclosure, I see there's a camera. I currently am employed by the city of DC, the District of Columbia's government. I work as a policy advisor and an aide for the mayor of Washington, DC. And I can promise you that that will in no way bias what I have to say today, because I completely plan to be critical of the ways in which the District of Columbia has marginalized people of color. And I bring that to you today because I want to use DC, the city that I do love, as a cautionary tale from my hometown. As where we're headed if we do not abandon this failing system of how we plan to deal with the issues of social injustice. So bear with me, that is my plan today, and hopefully I'll still have a job next week. Okay. So What happened in Glenville 50 years ago, we know was not isolated to Glenville. We know that across the country, there were, as they call them, civil disorders, uprisings, riots. There were those disturbances, as they might label them, across the country. And after these uprisings in New York City, in Chicago, in Washington, D.C., in Glenville, politicians decided, after New York City almost went bankrupt, they decided that, okay, we're going to change our objective here. We're no longer going to be a city that's focused on providing services. We are going to switch to economic development. Now, if you heard me speak at Race Food Justice, you know that I hate that term. I think that it is a word used to describe an activity that sounds like it's uplifting, when really it is meant to abandon the people who put you in office. It is an activity that it's a word used to betray the people who count on you the most, in the hopes of getting them eventually down the line. Have you ever met somebody who said they're gonna pay you back, but eventually down the line, I got other things to take care of? That's what economic development is, and I'll tell you why. You have in Cleveland and Washington, D.C., billions of dollars being invested into sports arenas, billions of dollars. Right now, the MLB All-Star Game is happening right now in Washington, D.C. Don't ask me how much we spent on it. But we invest so much money into these things, from parades to all-star games, into arenas, into attracting Amazon, into attracting big business, with the hopes that we'll take the profit and eventually invest it back into the people. How did we get to a place where the people came last? How do we get to a place where it is decided that we will first invest in expanding our tax base, and then we'll take care of people? Government at its core, service, public service must be at its core for the people first, not second, not third, not fourth. Thank you. And so when I realized what governments were doing, I was stunned. But what made me more surprised is to find that the people who led these governments looked like me, right? Black people, people of color, I mean, and not to single them out, but let's do it. Like black people who ran these cities. I mean, you have a black mayor here in Cleveland, right? Last time I checked, okay? We have a black mayor, my boss, who I think is great. I'll talk more about our policies as a comparative model, but my boss, African-American woman, DC has had black mayors for decades, right? You can go all over into major cities where there are predominantly black communities. In Atlanta, you can go all over and you'll find people who are black. So what does that tell me? It tells me that black capitalism is not the answer. It tells me that black politicians are not the answer. It tells me that black policing is not the answer. See, the thing that I've learned in my time as both an elected official and an activist is that you can't take something ugly and oppressive and paint it black and then say, voila. That's not a policy solution. And what we've seen happen is, okay, we have police brutality destroying our cities, so let's hire more black officers. I mean, I don't mean to be, now you just have black officers engaging in an anti-black system, right? You have a system in capitalism. I'm not gonna make any declarations on, overthrowing capitalism today. I'll leave that to you guys, right? But you have capitalism that has forever, not for decades or forever, left people of color and left people who are of meager means at the bottom, even in times of growth. The people who have always been the losers look like me, right? The people who are not able-bodied, the people who may not speak English, like those are the people who always lose. But we say, no, let's just empower, let's make more black businesses, and then that'll be the solution. Without a radical departure from the way things have been done forever, we are only going to reinforce the same oppressive behaviors, even if we don't intend to. What I mean by that is if you have a black business that still pays below a living wage, that does not push us forward, right? If you have black politicians who spout the same party lines from an organization that has never quite served us, that does not move us forward. right? So what does move us forward? I can talk forever about things that I hate, but what do I like, right? So there have been a couple of models that I think have really shown us when you aberrate from the usual, from the norm, when you put people first, right? You put the people over the profits. What does it look like? And I think that we have to be clear about what our problem here is. White supremacy is the greatest threat. It is the thing that ties, I looked at the 5 pillars, I loved it. That is every single problem. The fact that our public health systems are failing people of color. The fact that our schools are failing people of color. The fact that, you go all the way down the list, white supremacy is the thing that ties it down together. These things are not happening by mistake, they are happening by design. And no matter what social justice movement you're engaged in, no matter what your fight is, I promise you that in one way or another, you are engaged in a battle against America's soul. And here's what I mean by that. 4th of July, we all just enjoyed when we talk about who America is and what America stands for. And the thing that makes people uncomfortable, and that's why I'm scared to see it on camera, but the thing that makes people really uncomfortable is to acknowledge that who this country is and who this country has always been the foundation has always been white supremacy, protecting white supremacy, extending white supremacy. And so when you are engaged in a fight to improve your schools and your community, and you're thinking, this is logical. I'm just asking for the same that they're getting. I'm just asking for, no, what you're saying, you are challenging a system that was designed to keep your kids where they are, a system that was designed to give you the bare minimum. You're not fighting for a levy increase. You're not fighting for better teachers. You're fighting against a system that was literally purposed, and I'm just gonna say it, for your failure. This isn't being cynical. There are black politicians who have good intentions, who are still complicit in the same oppressive system that we have. We need a completely systemic shift. And so that requires being honest about who America is, okay? This is a country that was founded because people decided that they could come over and take. So now, when we talk about foundation, it's a sense of entitlement. It's a part of our foundation, entitlement. People who used God, glory, and gold. You all remember that from school? God, glory, and gold, right? So now you have money, the desire of money for for those people. That is now a part of our foundation. The idea of money over anything, get it by any means, even if those means include the disenfranchisement of Native Americans, of Hispanics, of people of color. Like, get it by any means is a part of our foundation. So when we're talking about America's soul, people say the fight against Trump is a fight for America's soul. Trump is America's soul. I mean, right? Like, I'll be honest with you, I'm only 22, so I'm leaning on a lot of stories that I've heard from my grandmother, who's here with us today, right? I'm leaning on a lot of the stories. I'm not standing on my own 2 feet here. I'm looking at history books, and I read the history books, and stop me, remember, we can engage here. Stop me when I lie. The things that are happening today, these aren't their first time happening. Family separation, I think I read about that before. When we talk about the imprisonment of children, I think I read that chapter before. These things aren't new, and so to anyone who pretends it is, come on, right? These things keep happening over and over again because, and if someone in your life, let's make it personal, they keep doing the same thing over and over again, and you say, we got to really fight against her soul there. No, that's who she is. That's who he is. That's who that person is. And if the longer we continue to pretend like that's just not who he is, he's just, he's different now. No, this is who America has been. A country that belittles those living at the margins, those that take from those who don't already have. That is what this country has been. And so as a young person, my goal is not to improve. And I heard that before. We need to improve our schools. We need to improve our, No, we don't need to improve them. We need to tear them down. We need to tear them down. We gotta, you don't look at your house, the foundation's clearly off, and you say, we need to improve this. No, sorry, you gotta tear it down. We gotta start over. And that sounds crazy, because what does that even look like, right? Like, that sounds absolutely nuts. Whew. Every step of the way, we see them build up white supremacy even more. ICE was created in 2002, right? This is a fairly new construct, and so when you hear people say abolish ICE, I'm like, how can we do that? It's been here for 16 years, right? They're building up white supremacy. It happens on a near daily basis where new institutions are added, powers are gained, and they are all stripping that power away from people like you and me. And so what does starting all over look like? I really was inspired by what you said about, oh, thank you, hey, sharing comment. But I'm really inspired, the idea that we have to do this together, right? Their unity happens in two ways. They were really united when they brought us all over here and they were taking everyone's rights and taking people's resources. They were really united. There was a unity that came with oppression. There's a unity right down there in these internment camps that we have along our border. There's a unity there. And so to oppose that, to dismantle that, to destroy that, we have to be united in that. That doesn't mean we're always going to agree on what that looks like. And we have to be okay with that. If you've ever listened to, and I don't want to be partisan here, because to be completely honest, I'm a registered independent. I am not going to make any type of case for any party. But let's talk about Republicans. If you've ever heard them talk about their plans for the future, they never agree with each other, right? The only thing that the Republicans are always solidly in support of, the only thing that brings them together is what they don't want to allow for people, for marginalized communities, right? It's never quite for something. It's like, no, we don't want pathways to citizenship. They don't have any other ideas about how to fix the immigration problem, but they're against rights for those, for undocumented persons, right? No, we don't want affirmative action, but they have no real policy prescription on how to right the wrongs of slavery and Jim Crow. No, we don't want this, but we're against that. There's still unity, because then they stand united on blocking everything without ever offering an idea on how to fix anything, right? And so we have to come together, and as a millennial, which is what I'm here to talk about, let me get to the point, white supremacy is a beast, and it's something that we will have to stand together on, black and white people together, Hispanic persons, able-bodied, disabled. We need everyone to come together, and I want to be clear that when I talk about white supremacy, I hope no white person hears that and says, oh, she's coming, for me. I hope we're all on the same page here when I say that white supremacy and white people are not, you have people who are black who enforce white supremacy. You have people who look like me who are still controlling, who are protecting master's land. I hope that we're agreed here that when I say that if you believe that all men are created equal, all men and women are created equal, all men, women, and other are created equal, then we can be on the same page here. We're engaged in the same fight. I'm not fighting against white people. I'm fighting against the idea that I'm less than a white person. And so you have to have, everyone on board who believes in this thing called social justice, who believes that people should be treated with respect. But then we talk about the generational struggle, which is something that I've experienced, in my role as a 22-year-old public servant. I ran for office when I was only 17 years old. I was not yet registered to vote. Thank you. But I wasn't yet registered to vote. When I decided to run for office, I encountered a lot of pushback, and I get it. I'm not sure, electing someone straight out of high school will be the thing that saves us. But I think that, bringing everyone to the table who's willing to fight, I think that there's value in that, right? I think that there's value in getting anyone who's willing to put the work in and finding a way to use them, even if you don't agree with them on 100% of the issues, finding a way to use everything, every resource we have access to. And so when I was 17, I ran for office, because I'm like, we have to stop this gentrification problem in DC. Like, it's outrageous, right? I was there in 2014, I was about 20 years too late. But let's stop this problem. Let me figure out what I can do as a 17-year-old. I had heart, I had passion, I had literally nothing else. I had 1 semester of political science under my belt. And every person who I asked to sign my petition reminded me of that. Hon, this is so great. You should do this again in 10 years, and I will be the first to support you. And I get where they're coming from, but I really want to challenge, our elders here. Because that fire that I had at 17, right, that fire that I had at 17 is the same fire I have right now. All right, and when I helped plan the Women's March, when I was with the kids from Parkland, Florida to plan the March for Our Lives, it's that fire that gets kids in the street. It's that fire that draws other people in. It's not expertise, right? Because sometimes we get so hung up on, oh, well, what are her credentials? You know, what school did she go to? Somebody said Harvard. I went to Howard, HU, but what are her credentials? What backing does she have? What grants has she received, right? What research has she published? That has never drawn anyone out anywhere. There is not a single march. And that's not to discredit that work, because it's important. The work is critical. But you know, when we plan the Women's March and we have almost 1 million people out there, you ask them, what did you come out here? It wasn't, oh, well, I read the new Jim Crow, and it really moved me to come all the way out here to Washington, D.C. It's that fire that brings people to the streets. They don't have to understand the things that are going on the slide there. They don't have to look at the chart and be like, oh, okay, well, civil disorders are caused by the 5. They don't have to connect to that. But everyone can connect to that emotion, that fire. And so to people who try to dim that, to people who try to shut that out of our process, that is the thing that we're fighting against. I mean, talk to some Trump supporters. They're not about to give you stats and facts and reports and scholarly essays. It's that fire. It's that passion. It's that fear. And we got to counter that. We got to counter that with passion, with fire, armed with intellect. Right? Still knowing what we're talking about, still coming in with facts, but not to push people away just because they don't have that. And as a young person, that's what I'm asking for. I want to hear what you guys need from me, but what I need is an openness and acceptance to let anybody who cares to the table. Anyone with that passion to come to the table, right? Right? I'm going to say this because I say this at any time. You know, you could have asked me to talk about housing policy, and I was still going to say this, so I'm going to say it now. Another thing is we have to stop shutting off people who don't vote. I mean, we have to stop telling people that the way to be engaged in this work is to vote. Because first of all, we looked at the numbers in Cleveland in the most recent election, and we know a whole bunch of us didn't vote. And when you cut those people out, and you pretend as if they don't have an opinion on these issues, when they have showed you how they feel, they have told you how they feel, simply by not voting. That is the clearest vote. That is a vote. That is the clearest statement about where they're at. A complete distrust, a complete lack of efficacy in the whole system. Don't shut that voice out. Don't ignore that voice. That is a voice that still needs to be engaged after Election Day. Our policy will not save us. How many times have policies that were well-intentioned been used as weapons against our community? I know we just blame it on Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton, but 20 years ago, the crime bill, its biggest supporters were black pastors and black activists. You know, we don't talk about that. But the biggest people who were behind the crime bill and other harmful legislation, Al Sharpton was, I mean, much respect, but Al Sharpton was the mouthpiece for that bill. Everybody's quiet now. So everybody's quiet now, but I remember, well, I watched, right? We know that policy won't save us. Laws in America are based on a constitution that didn't see us as whole people. They uphold a document that didn't see my humanity, that didn't see your humanity, that still doesn't acknowledge women, that still doesn't acknowledge gender binary people, that still does not acknowledge the fullness of America. And so laws, let's definitely oppose laws when they are bad and present laws that'll move us forward, but let's not count on them. They won't be the things that save us. People, our greatest resource in this fight. People. Investing in people, doing right by each other, even in the work that we're doing. If you are the head of an activist organization, making sure that you pay your employees. I love when Kim Foreman talks about taking care of people and respecting their value. That it has to be essential to our work. We have to begin to create the communities that we claim we want to live in. That starts in our household, that starts in the places that we work, that starts in our nonprofits, that starts in our schools. We begin reflecting the lives that we want to live. I'm not talking about communes here, I promise you. But start to actualize the lives that we claim. Let's prove that it's working. A good friend of mine, the mayor of Stockton, California, it's a capitalist like everywhere else, right? It's a city, a major city, just like what we're talking about here in Cleveland. And he, instead of going and talking to big dollar donors to fund his campaign, this brother who's 26 years old, the mayor of Stockton, went and asked private sector dollars to go into not his campaign, not one of his, brand. He wanted them to pay for a living wage, a minimum wage for everyone, a living wage. No job, you are still going to get this check every month. It's an experiment. The mayor of Stockton is willing to go outside of the lines. He's willing to change the system. He's willing to stop reading the talking points given to him by Democratic Party heads. He is trying something new, and every single person in Stockton, California, homeless or not, receives a basic living wage. That is the type of boldness and courage that we're gonna need to move our communities forward. It can't be the same old, because clearly it's not working. It's failing us. And we need people who are transformational leaders. That doesn't mean any of us have it figured out. Who knows if the experiment in Stockton is going to work? But at least it's something else. At least it's not the same things claiming it's working. Last thing I want to talk about is fake numbers. Because we're in there's a lot of academics here. There's a lot of people whose work relies on research. And I come from DC, where if you look at our numbers, we're doing great, okay? Our graduation rate has improved. Our average median income is north of $100,000 annually. Our cost of living is high, and if you look at the numbers, things look good. But the truth is, the people who were suffering before, they're still suffering. They're suffering elsewhere. They are not there anymore. So when you look at the numbers and you say, look at Ward 1 in Washington, D.C., where I was a representative, and you see the homelessness is falling, it's because they pushed the homeless people out, okay? They're not there anymore. When you say our schools are doing better, the graduation rate is going up, the kids don't go to those schools anymore, right? That's not a win for me. And I think we have to challenge our politicians. We have to, oh, there's a question, I'm excited. Okay. Awesome.
Thank you. When I attend meetings like this, and I attend to many of them, I always leave feeling depressed.
Oh, man.
And
Yeah.
these are the best people in town, but they got one problem. The average age of this room is the depressing factor to me. And I know I make more of a contribution to that than almost anyone else here. But the reality is that we always have middle-aged and older veterans talking to each other about what the problem is, and even coming up with wonderful solutions sometimes. But the young people never hear it.
Yeah.
And my question to you is, can you give us some ideas of strategies that us older folks ought to be employing in order to develop communication and involvement with your generation? Because as long as we're only talking to each other, we're only spinning our wheels. Thank you.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for that. That means everything to me. I'll be honest with you, if I can keep it 100% real. When I was in high school, that's when that activist fire was first lit, right? I went to a school that needed a levy to be passed. We didn't have school buses or AP classes. They were cutting everything. And I began, organizing. I didn't even know that that's what it was called, but asking my friends to come out and make some noise, counting on my mom to get her news reporter friends to come out and cover some crazy kids on a Friday night, just complaining, just going nuts and talking about what we wanted for our school. That was the beginning of it, right? And the levy passed. I felt good about it. That's how I got started. And then I decided, I'm gonna start working for, our Senator Sherrod Brown. I'm gonna intern for him because I'm so pumped and I wanna figure out what else I can do. I'm so excited and I wanna go engage our local leaders. And I can tell you that some point between, the first point that fire was lit and before I got ready to go to college, I got accepted to a couple of area schools. But I will be honest and say that I felt like this neighborhood, the Cleveland, never really gave me room to really just go crazy in the way that I was ready to. And of course I needed mentorship and guidance, and I needed to be, managed in a lot of ways because I was young and still am young. But I never really felt like Cleveland had enough infrastructure to really support and develop young people. And so many of my peers who are like me have all left, right? They leave. They go other places, and I'm saying this because I know it's a difference. In Washington, D.C., people were looking at me crazy, like you're running at 17, but they still voted for me. They said, you know what, we like that passion, we like that fire, we're gonna get behind her. And I had so many people in the community say, now listen, young one, this is, don't do this like this. I'm gonna be at every meeting holding you accountable and showing you the way that you should do things. But it was still like, we're gonna let her, she's clearly on fire, and we're gonna support that. I have not. Recently, I felt it. I come to things like this and race, food justice, and there is an intention. There is an intention of, being very, very precise about including young people, involving young people, and letting them take on, letting me speak at this mic. And I think that if we can really fully embrace young people, not just say we want them there for their labor or their efforts, we don't just want them to show us how to use social media, but like really figuring out, asking them and saying, what are your skills? What are your gifts? What is it? How do you think like what you just did? How can we be better? And really engaging them like real stakeholders, because that's what we are. Not engaging us like we're your children, because while we have so much to learn from you, there's a sort of condescension that comes along with it. And I think that that's what I promise you, there's a room in Cleveland, Ohio with a bunch of young people talking about similar issues right now. So just because they're not here doesn't mean they're not out there. And so I think that opening your arms and not just saying, come follow me, young one, but saying, how can we work together? Seeing me as your true partner. I'm gonna learn from you no matter what, but treating me like your partner is how we move forward. Okay. So we're gonna go here and then up to Kim, and then here we go. Hi.
Yeah, there's a 22-year-old running for mayor of Chicago.
Yeah.
How do you feel about him?
So my friend is actually running. He's 24 and he's running for alderman in Chicago right now. And so I've been trying to keep up with the Chicago races. The thing is, the age never matters. I want to know what your transformational ideas are about changing our communities. The age is so irrelevant. I met the kids from Parkland, Florida, after the shooting. They're like 16 and 17, and there are many of them who I would vote for right now at 16. Whose ideas about how we're going to change our society, about treating people with respect, making sure that our laws truly reflect our values. Like, that's what's important. And so I think that Rahm Emanuel has done an incredibly poor job of leading Chicago. I think when you look at a range of like bad mayors, like he has to take a trophy. And so I think that change in any way, if it's radical change from what Rahm Emanuel has brought Chicago, the city of Chicago, we definitely have to give it a serious thought, and that age should not be the thing that we look at. Now, obviously with mayors, you definitely want them to have some experience. You want them to, but that experience does not come in other elected offices, and that's what I think people need to embrace. Who wants someone who's just been in office for a long time and the city looks the same from when they started, Experience isn't gonna save us. You can have 20 years of really bad experience, and so I think that we need to stop looking at people who hold offices for a long time and say, I trust that guy. No, that guy is clearly not doing a very good job.
Thank you for the shout out, Allison.
No problem.
Okay, so I didn't get to say it up there, but in Garden Valley, we're working on youth program leadership, right? So we have 13 to 18-year-olds, and then we have about 13. So what happened organically is there's a radio station in Garden Valley, a community radio station, and one of the program managers, Ray Robinson, Embrace the Youth. They've been already discussing their issues about colorism, about the school system, about racism and healthy living and things like that. So they have formed a group to start to record their podcast on WOVU 95.5. And so the sustainable part of this is the program, but utilizing that program with a sustainable mindset.
Yeah.
So to leverage that energy and start to bring them into that radio station, and they develop their own programming over the next 2 years, and then they can, and I know, Allison, you will come and be interviewed.
Oh, of
and
course.
so, you know, we want to engage the larger community through this podcast, understanding that the youth are leading it. It's not for us to dictate to them, but to then support them and make sure they have the proper information so that they can launch their own podcast in the radio station.
I love it. That's amazing. And that just reminded me of something else. Young people do things a little bit differently, right? Technology is largely responsible for that, but we do things a little bit differently. And that doesn't mean that we can't find a way. Somebody talked about needing a bridge. You know, this isn't a new issue. Martin Luther King and Stokely Carmichael really struggled to find a way to work together, right? I'm brain dead right now, but I'm trying to remember the activist. It was a woman who stepped in and tried to really mediate the way that the young people from SNCC There we go. To sit down and kind of mediate the way that they could work together. We definitely need a bridge, but also understanding that we're not always going to do things the same way. You know, when I was in D.C. and Mike Brown had just been killed, we planned an entire shutdown of Union Station using Twitter. You know, we didn't see each other a single time. So meetings like this, you know, they didn't happen, you know? And so just respecting our differences and recognizing that that's our strength is how we come together. But thank you. I definitely will be interviewed if I'm invited.
Yes, how you doing?
I'm great. How are you?
Pretty good. I was in Washington, D.C. last year at the African American History Museum, and we stayed in Baltimore on the way in. Mm-hmm. A lot of people don't know it, but there are people that work, but they live out there near the Amtrak tracks. I mean, groups of 30, 40 people in tents and stuff because they've been bought out in the city, but they can't afford apartments, and some of them had 2 jobs.
Yeah.
And they still can't afford to live in the city. And you have a large influx of Asians moving in, and also Anacostia Park is totally changed.
Yeah.
And even from Howard, which I was a member of, walking over to Meridian Hill, that whole neighborhood has changed because a lot of people that has owned houses, they passed away, and developers and other people that don't look like us came in and paid those back taxes and pushed all those people out. Mm-hmm. And to show you how much it changed, when I was going to Howard, Meridian Hill Park used to be called Malcolm X.
Malcolm X Park, exactly.
Yes.
And there's a lot of people still in that community who resist and still call it Malcolm X Park. I had to remind myself what Meridian Hill Park was, because it's still Malcolm X in my mind.
Yes, yeah. Same here. Thank you.
Thank you for that. It actually just reminded me, though, you mentioned Howard and Meridian Hill Park. Howard University used to be one of the largest landowners in Washington, D.C.
Yes.
And so when we talk about where we're at now, we also have to acknowledge that Howard University sold
a lot of their property.
Sold their property. They participated, willing participants in gentrification. And so how do we hold our own institutions accountable? We put so much work, so much labor into building up our institutions, our black churches, our black schools, our HBCUs. How do we hold them accountable to make sure that they continue serving in our interest, even when there's an economic opportunity to betray their own people?
Yes, because right? even when I got off on Shaw Avenue at the metro station, going through there, it was like
Georgetown.
Yeah. I mean, I was totally shocked. Kids on skateboards and got the dog. I'm like, what the heck happened, you know?
Yeah.
And it just surprised me. Plus, on top of that, Howard is paying white students to come there and go to class there now. The ones that can't afford Georgetown and so forth, they're coming to Howard.
Well, I do want to say Howard University's first students were white students. And so I don't think that, you know, having white classmates has been a very important part of my experience at Howard. But I definitely believe that we have to hold our institutions accountable to their mission. And so long as those white students are white students who are committed to tackling social injustice, those are my brothers and sisters, and we're engaged in the same fight. But I definitely hear where you're coming from, and we have to hold our institutions accountable.